It was the kind of neighborhood where nothing exciting ever happened. Just rows of neatly trimmed hedges, homes that all looked the same, and neighbors who barely waved. Most of them liked it quiet. Rules were followed, lawns were cut on time, and the HOA made sure everything stayed in order. If your grass was half an inch too tall, you'd hear about it. If your trash bins were out 10 minutes too early, a notice would show up. That was just how it was. I'd lived there long enough to know better than to push back. I'm not the social type. Retired, widowed, kept to myself. Folks around here thought I was a grump, and I didn't mind. Let them talk. I liked peace and quiet, and the rules, as annoying as they were, kept things predictable. Then she moved in. Small moving truck. One friend helped her unload, then left by nightfall. She was young, maybe early 30s. Looked tired. Alone. And very obviously pregnant. No partner in sight. No welcome committee either, not that the HOA ever did that. Just whispers. People watching from behind their blinds. Making their little judgments. I noticed the first violation slip on her door a week later. Her mailbox hadn't been repainted to match the required color. A small thing, but the HOA jumped on it. A couple of days later, another notice, this time for a tiny patch of weeds near her walkway. 2 strikes in less than 10 days. She was barely unpacked. She tried to fix everything fast. I saw her outside one afternoon, sitting on an overturned box, scrubbing at the mailbox with a sponge and a can of paint balanced on her lap. She moved slow, kept stopping to hold her belly and breathe. Nobody offered to help. They just watched. The board didn't care that she was new or that she was expecting. To them, she was already a problem. That's how they saw people who didn't blend in immediately. I knew that tone. I'd seen it before, used to hear it when my wife was alive and we tried planting a vegetable garden. They made us tear it out. Said it didn't fit the aesthetic guidelines. The next week, I overheard Karen, her real name, head of the HO, bragging to another board member on the sidewalk. "She's not going to last long," she said. "She'll either fall in line or she'll be out. We've dealt with worse." I didn't say anything. I just listened. But something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. Then came the third violation. Something about an unauthorized visitor. Probably the same friend who helped her move in. The notice was worded in legal terms, sounded serious. It wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a formal notice. And with 3 violations, she could be fined or even taken to a hearing. That day, I saw her sit on her porch steps, holding the letter, just staring at it. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat there, like someone trying not to break. It was hot outside, midsummer, and she looked pale. I watched for a few more minutes, then walked across the street. We'd never spoken. She looked up, surprised, maybe even nervous. I wasn't exactly the friendly neighbor type. But I nodded, handed her a bottle of cold water, and said, "They did the same to me once. Different reasons, same bull." She blinked, then gave a small, tired smile. We sat there for a bit, saying nothing. That was the first time I saw the cracks forming, not just in her situation, but in the whole HOA system. It was like the board didn't see her as a person. Just another file in their folder. And the worst part? No one else seemed to care. She thanked me for the water. I asked if she had family nearby. She shook her head. Said she moved here for the quiet, thinking it would be a good place to raise her baby. I didn't know what to say to that. I just remember thinking, this place might look quiet from the outside, but inside those pretty houses and perfect lawns, something was off. And that pregnant girl across the street? She was about to learn just how cruel the HOA could be. A few days passed, and things didn't get any better for her. I noticed the same silver HOA vehicle driving by her house twice a day, slowing down just enough to snap pictures. They didn't even hide it. They wanted her to know they were watching. Every day seemed to bring another notice taped to her door, bright yellow or bold red, violation warning, final notice, compliance required. It didn't matter how small the issue was. Trash bin slightly off the curb. Curtains too dark. A stroller left on the porch. All of it became fuel for their so-called case. I started watching more closely. Not in a nosy way, more like I didn't trust what the HOA might do next. She was doing her best, I could tell. She swept her walkway, trimmed the bushes, even tried repainting the garage door to match their ridiculous color chart. But it wasn't enough. The board had clearly decided she was a problem. And once the HOA labeled you like that, they never let up. I saw her one morning standing at the end of her driveway, clutching her belly and a piece of paper in the other hand. Her face was red, but not from the heat. She looked angry. Or maybe just fed up. I crossed over again, slower this time, not wanting to startle her. She handed me the paper without a word. I read it carefully. It was a formal notice of hearing. They were trying to revoke her residency due to chronic non-compliance with community standards. According to the letter, the board had documented 9 separate violations in under 45 days. That couldn't be real. Some of the things listed were petty to the point of cruelty. Porch light left on past 10 p.m. Improper plant type in front yard flower bed. Unapproved temporary seating structure, which I realized was the folding lawn chair she used to sit on when she watered the garden. They're trying to evict you? I asked. She nodded, her voice quiet. They said I'm making the neighborhood look unstable. Unstable? The woman was about to have a child on her own, keeping her property tidy, paying her dues, and somehow she was the one being called a problem? I felt a cold kind of anger rise in me. I'd dealt with the HOA's nonsense before, but this was different. This wasn't about a rule. This was personal. That night, I dug through my old files in the garage. I used to be on the HOA board years ago, before Karen took over and turned it into a dictatorship. Back then we helped neighbors, not hunted them. I still had copies of the original bylaws, the ones they never updated properly when they rewrote the handbook. I found sections that made it clear eviction required community voting, documented safety violations, and legal approval. None of which she had. The next day, I walked into the HOA office. Karen was there, of course, wearing that smug smile she always had when she knew she held power. She didn't bother to hide her irritation when she saw me. Didn't think you cared about board matters anymore, she said. I do when they start pushing pregnant women out of their homes, I replied. She laughed like it was all a joke. She's not following the rules. It's not personal. But it was. And we both knew it. I laid the old bylaws on her desk. You're bluffing, I said. You don't have the authority to do what you're threatening. She flipped through the papers, eyes narrowing. She didn't say anything. I could see the gears turning, trying to figure out a way around them. She thought I'd just disappear back into my house like always. She didn't expect me to fight. I walked out without waiting for a response. Later that evening, I saw the woman again, sitting on her porch. She looked exhausted, but she smiled when she saw me. I handed her a copy of the bylaws and told her not to worry. They're wrong, I said. And I'm not going to let them get away with it. She looked like she wanted to cry, but didn't. Just nodded, holding the paper like it was the first good news she'd gotten in weeks. That night, the HOA called an emergency meeting. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the only one watching. That emergency HOA meeting turned out to be more like a show trial. They didn't invite her to speak. They didn't notify the community either. Just a quiet, closed-door session held in the clubhouse after sunset. But what they forgot, or maybe didn't realize, is that the windows weren't tinted. And some of us still remembered how to listen without being seen. I walked up the path quietly and stood near the bushes behind the building. Inside, I saw Karen at the head of the table, arms folded, looking satisfied. A few of the other board members sat beside her, nodding like trained parrots. Papers shuffled. Someone projected her supposed violations on a screen. And one by one, they agreed that she had created disruption in the community. No one asked about her pregnancy. No one questioned whether their actions were fair. One woman, Marcia, I think, did suggest waiting until after the baby was born. Karen shut that down fast. We can't delay just because she chose to complicate her living situation, she said, cold as ever. That sentence stuck with me. Chose to complicate her living situation? She wasn't breaking windows or hosting parties. She was trying to survive. Grow a baby. Mow her lawn in between contractions, probably. And these people were acting like she was a criminal. like a weed in their perfect garden. I wasn't the only one watching either. I noticed two other neighbors down the path, quietly listening like I was. One of them was Jeremy, the young guy who worked remotely from his back porch. The other was Dana, who'd lived in the neighborhood just as long as I had. They both caught my eye and nodded slightly. Maybe this time, I wouldn't be the only one speaking up. The next morning, I made copies of the real HOA bylaws, the ones that still held legal weight. I walked door to door and handed them out. People were surprised. Most had no idea Karen had made up new rules over the years, or that the original rules were buried. Some were mad. Some were embarrassed. But most of them read the part 1 highlighted in yellow. No homeowner shall be removed from the property without a full community vote, legal cause, and clear evidence of threat or neglect. She had none of that. Around noon, I saw something I hadn't expected, Karen walking up to the woman's porch. Clipboard in hand, smile too wide, voice too sweet. I watched from my own porch as they spoke. Karen seemed to be offering something, maybe trying to bribe her into leaving quietly. But the woman didn't take the bait. She shook her head, stepped back, and closed the door without another word. Karen looked furious. She turned and stormed down the sidewalk, barking something into her phone. Not even pretending anymore. An hour later, a new letter appeared taped to her door. I walked over after Karen left and took it down. This time, they weren't just fining her, they were threatening legal action. Claiming she was a risk to neighborhood values and harmony. A risk. That's what they called her. A woman who hadn't done anything but try to live in peace and raise her baby. I knocked gently. She answered, her face pale again. "They're saying they'll take me to court," she said softly. I handed her the letter. "They can try," I said. "But they'll lose." That evening, a few of us gathered on my porch. Jeremy, Dana, even a few people I didn't expect. Folks were finally talking. Tired of the HOA's threats, tired of Karen's control, tired of watching decent people get pushed out. We decided we'd go to the next open board meeting, not just to speak up, but to vote. That's right, vote. Because those old bylaws gave the community the right to remove board members with a majority. Karen might have ruled with fear, but fear doesn't last when truth finally walks in. I wasn't doing this for me. I was doing it for the woman across the street. The one everyone ignored, until now. The one who had every right to be here, just like anyone else. And maybe, just maybe, she'd finally feel like this place could be her home too. The night of the board meeting came quicker than expected. Word had spread quietly but steadily about the vote, about the bylaws, and most importantly, about what they were trying to do to her. People who hadn't cared about HOA meetings for years suddenly showed up. Some came out of curiosity. Others came out of anger. And a few, I think, came because deep down, they knew staying silent any longer made them part of the problem. I arrived early and the room was already half full. Folding chairs lined up in rows, fluorescent lights buzzing above. Karen sat in her usual seat at the front table, clipboard in hand, acting like she still had everything under control. Her usual board allies sat on either side of her, whispering among themselves. I could tell they weren't as confident as usual. Not with the way they kept glancing at the door every time someone else walked in. Then she walked in, the pregnant woman. Not late. Not hiding. She stepped inside wearing a simple dress, her hands resting gently on her stomach, her head held high. A few people looked away, guilty. A few nodded to her. And Karen? She didn't look at her at all. When the meeting started, Karen went through the motions like she always did. Minutes from the last meeting. Budget updates. A few rule adjustments. Then she cleared her throat and tapped her clipboard. "There is one final matter," she said, her voice rehearsed. "It involves ongoing noncompliance by a resident who has failed to maintain neighborhood standards. As a board, we've reviewed the violations and—" "That's not your call to make," I said, standing up. All eyes turned toward me. Karen blinked. "Excuse me?" I took a step forward. "You don't have the authority to evict anyone without a vote from this community. You know that. It's in the bylaws." She tried to smile. "Those bylaws were updated years ago. The board has full disciplinary rights." I raised a folder. "Not legally." You never filed the changes with the county. The original bylaws still stand. And I've got copies for everyone right here. Jeremy stood too, handing out copies row by row. Dana followed. Karen's face shifted from smug to stunned. People were reading, flipping pages, pointing out sections to each other. The room filled with murmurs. "We're not here tonight to hear you push someone out," I said. "We're here to vote on whether you still deserve to lead." A beat of silence. Then someone clapped. Just one. Then more. And then, for the first time in years, the board didn't feel untouchable anymore. Karen stood up, clearly rattled. "You can't just—" "Yes, we can," said a voice from the back. It was the lawyer who lived 3 houses down, the one who never talked to anyone. "These documents are legally binding. And we have enough people here for quorum. Let's vote." People raised hands. One by one. Clear, steady, unapologetic. Karen sat back down slowly. For once, she had nothing to say. 3 board members were voted out that night, Karen included. A special election was scheduled, and a temporary committee was formed to handle disputes until then. But more than that, something else shifted, something deeper. Neighbors started talking again. The very next day, 2 families came by to check on the pregnant woman. One brought food. Another offered to help paint her garage. Even kids from the street who never said a word waved when they passed by. I watched it all from my porch. Not out of pride, but relief. This place had finally remembered what a neighborhood was supposed to feel like. That evening, I saw her walking slowly down the sidewalk, one hand on her belly, the other holding a letter. She stopped at my gate. "They dropped everything," she said. "All the fines. The threats. Everything." I nodded. "About time." She smiled, tired but lighter than before. "I don't know why you helped me." I looked at her and said, "Because nobody else did. And because once, someone helped me when no one else would." She stood there for a moment, just taking in the quiet. "You changed everything," she whispered. I didn't answer. I just opened the gate and gestured toward the porch. We sat down together, listening to the wind rustle the trees, the street calm again, for now. The next few weeks felt like the neighborhood was breathing again. People who used to keep their heads down started looking each other in the eye. Sidewalk conversations returned. Yards no longer looked like competition displays. It was like the weight of Karen's reign had finally been lifted. And somehow, in the middle of all this change, that young woman across the street had become the quiet symbol of it. She still kept mostly to herself. But now, people came to her. They brought meals, offered rides, helped repair things that had been left broken under all the pressure. The same neighbors who had ignored her when she arrived now waved and asked how she was feeling. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was real. She was due any week now. I could see the changes in how she moved, slower, more careful. Her front porch was decorated with small gifts, blankets, diapers, baby books. I left a rocking chair I'd sanded and repainted next to her door one morning. Didn't knock. Just left it there. She sent me a thank you note with a picture of her ultrasound tucked inside. And yet, not everyone had let go. One evening, I saw Karen standing across the street by her car. She no longer held her clipboard like a weapon, but her eyes were sharp as ever. She was talking to someone, another former board member who'd been voted out with her. They kept glancing over at the house, arms crossed, voices low but tense. I didn't need to hear the words to know they hadn't moved on. The very next day, a complaint notice showed up on her door again. Not official. Just a typed letter slipped between the screen door and the frame. No letterhead. No signature. It claimed her lawn had become an eyesore, and that her presence was lowering neighborhood expectations. It wasn't from the board. It wasn't legal. It was petty. She brought it over, holding it with 2 fingers like it was something toxic. "Should I be worried?" she asked. I shook my head. "It's empty. She doesn't have any power anymore." But I knew Karen wouldn't stop quietly. People like her didn't know how to lose. They just waited, plotted, tried to find back doors. That weekend, the neighborhood held its first open community potluck in years. Someone set up folding tables in the park. Kids ran around, dogs barked, the smell of barbecue filled the air. The woman came too, big, glowing, moving slow, but surrounded by support. I watched her laugh for the first time since she moved in. She sat with Dana and her daughters, holding a paper plate full of food and smiling like she belonged. I brought my famous peach cobbler. People still pretend not to like sweet things, but that dish vanished in 20 minutes. That's when she came up to me again. She asked if she could sit with me for a while, said her feet were killing her. I nodded and scooted over on the bench. After a long pause, she said, "I was ready to leave. Before all of this." I looked over at her, waiting. They made me feel like I didn't matter. Like being alone and pregnant meant I was just in the way. I really thought I had no place here. Her voice cracked a little, but she steadied it. And then you showed up with a bottle of water. And you didn't ask questions. You just listened. I didn't know what to say. I never did when people got too emotional. So I just looked at her and said, "Sometimes all we need is someone to remind us we belong." She smiled, brushing her hair back, her other hand resting over her belly. I hope my kid grows up in a place like this, where people care enough to stand up when things go wrong. Before I could respond, Dana called her over to take pictures by the food table. She stood up slowly and walked away, her hand resting gently on her back. And as I watched her join the rest of the neighbors, laughing, smiling, alive, I realized something. This neighborhood had changed. And maybe I had too. And maybe the people who once followed the rules out of fear were now learning to lead with kindness instead. It was just past midnight when I heard the knock. Soft but steady. At first, I thought I imagined it. Then came another, this time faster. I shuffled to the door, unsure who'd be visiting me at that hour. When I opened it, she was standing there, barefoot on the porch, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the railing. "She's coming," she whispered, eyes wide, voice shaking. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my coat, my truck keys, and helped her into the front seat. Her water had already broken. Every bump on the road made her wince, but she didn't complain. She just focused on breathing in and out, gripping the dashboard. I wasn't a young man anymore, but that night, I drove like I was 20 again. Red lights felt longer. Every slow car in front of me made my blood boil. I kept talking to her, telling her we were close, that everything was going to be fine. She didn't say much, but she nodded, teeth clenched, holding on like the pain was swallowing her whole. The hospital staff rushed her in the moment we arrived. I wasn't family, but I told them she had no one else. They let me sit in the waiting room just down the hall. The walls were cold, the lights too bright, and the minutes stretched into hours. At some point, a nurse walked over, smiling. "She's okay," she said. "And the baby's healthy." I felt a weight drop from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. They let me see her once she was moved to recovery. She looked tired, but glowing in a way that only new mothers do. The baby was in her arms, wrapped tight, asleep. She looked up when she saw me and whispered, "It's a girl." I sat beside her, careful not to get too close. She asked if I wanted to hold the baby. I froze, then shook my head. "I'll just watch a while," I said. She smiled and said, "Her name's Hope." I think I nodded, but I couldn't speak. My throat was too tight. They kept her in the hospital for 2 days. I came back each morning with coffee and whatever snacks I thought she might like. Other neighbors sent flowers. Dana dropped off a baby blanket. Jeremy left a card with gift vouchers for groceries and baby items. The community that once watched her from behind closed windows now leaned in, helping however they could. When she came home, we made sure she didn't come back to silence. Her porch had balloons, a welcome sign, and a fresh coat of paint, courtesy of 2 teenage boys who'd overheard the story and offered to help. I watched from across the street as she climbed the steps slowly, baby carrier in one hand, soft blanket draped over her shoulder. She paused at the door, looked around, then smiled and disappeared inside. For a while, the neighborhood settled into a rhythm again. The new board took over, younger and more thoughtful. Rules didn't vanish, but they softened. Conversations replaced warnings. Help replaced judgment. People still had opinions, of course. This was the suburbs, after all, but the fear that once loomed over every mailbox notice had faded. I saw her often. She'd push the stroller up and down the block in the morning sun, waving at whoever passed by. Sometimes she'd stop to chat. Sometimes she'd sit on her porch, rocking Hope gently while sipping tea. And sometimes, in the evening, she'd sit beside me on my porch instead, just enjoying the quiet. She never talked about Karen anymore. Neither did most of the neighbors. Karen had moved out 2 streets over, rumor said. Still bitter. Still quiet. No one missed her. But I thought about it sometimes, how one woman, alone and exhausted, nearly got forced out just because she didn't fit into someone else's version of acceptable. And how easily everyone went along with it, until they didn't. Hope was growing fast. The last time I saw her, she reached for my cane and tried to wobble her way across the porch. Her mother laughed and said, "She's already braver than I ever was." I didn't tell her, but I disagreed. She was brave from the very beginning. And all it took was one person seeing it, just one, to make the rest follow. It had been nearly a year since that storm the HOA tried to bring down on her. Seasons had changed. The trees were full again. Lawns were green, but not obsessively perfect like before. And the rules, well, they still existed, but they finally made room for the people who lived under them. I was sipping my coffee on the porch one morning, watching the sun rise behind the houses, when I heard the soft roll of stroller wheels on pavement. There she was again, Hope bundled up in a yellow blanket, giggling at the birds overhead. Her mother walked slower these days, not from fatigue, but peace. That tension she used to wear around her shoulders like armor was gone now. She waved as she passed, then turned back and walked up to my porch. "She's teething," she said with a tired smile. "Didn't sleep a wink." I chuckled and pointed to the wooden rocker. "That thing got me through my son's entire first year," I said. "Must be good luck." She laughed and took a seat. Hope stared at me like she was trying to figure me out. I made a silly face and got a laugh. Her mother smiled and leaned back, eyes closed for a moment, just soaking in the calm. "You know," she said after a pause, "I still have all the letters Karen sent me. Every violation. Every threat." I didn't say anything at first. Just let her keep going. I thought about burning them. But now I keep them in a folder labeled "Reasons I Stayed." That made me laugh harder than I expected. "I don't keep them to be bitter," she added. "I keep them because they remind me how far we've come." I nodded slowly. It made sense. Some scars don't fade, they just turn into stories. Around that same time, the new HOA board started something called Neighbor Days. Once a month, people gathered for yard help, community meals, or just to check in. What had started as a reactive vote had turned into a real shift in culture. The same HOA that once fined someone for a faded fence now helped repaint it, with volunteers, not penalties. She became part of it too. Not loud, not official, but people turned to her. She had this quiet strength, the kind that didn't need a title to lead. When new neighbors moved in, she was the first one to leave a basket on their porch. Not with rules. With cookies, a handwritten note, and her phone number. One day, a young couple moved into a house 2 doors down. The woman was expecting. First child. Nervous. Overwhelmed. I watched from my porch as she approached them, stroller in hand, big smile on her face. I could tell just by the way they nodded, the way they leaned in to listen, they already trusted her. Later, she told me the young mom had asked, "Is this a good place to raise a child?" And without missing a beat, she'd said, "It didn't used to be. But it is now." We both knew why. Even I had changed. For years, I'd kept my head down, stuck to my routine, avoided neighbors as much as possible. But watching someone fight so hard for a home, while carrying a child, did something to me. Made me realize how easy it is to ignore injustice when it doesn't knock on your own door. How silence isn't neutral. It's permission. Now, people called me by name. Kids waved. I even helped Jeremy fix his mailbox last month, and we talked for 2 hours afterward like old friends. And she'd gone from the girl they tried to push out to the neighbor everyone respected. There were still moments, quiet ones, when she sat alone on her porch after dark, just holding Hope and staring at the stars. I imagined she was remembering those early weeks, the fear, the loneliness. But I also knew she felt something stronger now. Belonging. Safety. All it took was one person daring to say, "This isn't right." And then another. And another. She looked over one evening, caught me watching and smiled. "Feels like home now," she said. And I smiled back. Because it did. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing. It really helps support the channel and brings you more content just like this.